All right. With me today is Julian Bermudez, who reached out to me. Well, first of all, Julian, welcome. Thank you. We had a nice little quick conversation here. So excited to get into the meat of why you reached out. And so I really wanted to start with that question today. You reached out saying, "Hey, I see a connection between us," and after getting to know you just a little bit, I find it obvious, but what did you see that being? What caused you to reach out and ask to, come on the podcast?
hmm Yeah, I think that right now a lot of people are experiencing a lot of difficulties, a lot of struggles, a lot of challenges in life. And a lot of that, which I'd be happy to talk more about where this comes from, and this is a big part of my work. But a lot of the times, when we're healing these pains that are causing these disconnections, a lot of the times, things that we focus on is at some point meaning, purpose. What was the meaning of all of this? Why did this happen? Why is this here in my life right now? And when we start asking these questions, it really sets a nice foundation for transformation in terms of how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others in the world around us. So when I saw your show, The Meaning Project, and I saw the topics that you were talking about, I said, this is probably a really good area where you're sharing some good information, and I thought that we could have a wonderful conversation together.
I'm excited for it. I was thinking as I was preparing for our time together. It's been a particularly exhausting therapeutic day. I don't know, 6, 7 sessions, something like that. A rewarding, exhausting one. And I felt my energy dipping. And then I pulled up your website. I'm like, oh my goodness, I get to talk to this person about something we find mutually helpful and rewarding. Like it's that weird space, but like I feel my energy I know my energy is low, but it's so high to be able to talk to you today. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where the conversation goes. Tell me a little bit about the work you do out there in Portland with psychedelic integration.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm seeing a lot of people, the vast majority of people, really having a difficult time right now. And a lot of people are really struggling and having challenging experiences, just feeling safe or welcome, just navigating the world. And it really shouldn't be that way. And so, what I really started doing was taking a look at what are the causes for people to feel really unsafe in their own life, in their own bodies, in their own, just with who they are. And I started seeing how people are just harsh and critical and judgmental towards themselves. And they treat themselves so poorly, they'll sacrifice themselves to maintain attachments or relationships. They'll make themselves people pleasers. Lots of things. And so, very early in my work, I started focusing on trauma, really understanding what is trauma, how does it affect us, how do we adapt to it, and how do those adaptations to that trauma cause us to disconnect, and how do we build these personality traits or behavioral patterns based from those adaptations to trauma. So the question became, how does the pain from the past continue to show up in the present? And how does it constrict us and limit us? And how can we regain or recover agency, responsibility, choice making to ultimately liberate ourselves from these patterns? So, this is what I focus on extensively with every single person that I work with.
That's so much richness and beauty in that statement and in the work you're doing. Something in particular, as you started to talk about your work, really stuck out to me, and that's that idea. First, the feeling that so many people are experiencing, that's that feeling of being unsafe. But you said even unsafe in their own body. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I'll just talk about my own personal experiences with this rather than talking about somebody else's. And I'm sure a lot of people will resonate with this, which was when I first started doing my own work, 17 years ago, really starting to take a an inventory of what I was going through and building awareness on what my experience was, is my anxiety was through the roof. I would wake up in the morning and my heart would be pounding out of my chest. My stomach would be so tight and constricted. My muscles were always tight. I was in what we could call fight or flight constantly from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. And then throughout the night, I would wake up with night terrors, screaming. Um, yeah, just never once feeling safe. And I can trace this feeling back, as most people do when I work with them, to the very early stages of my life, where I was growing up in very unsafe circumstances. Um, and I'd be happy to talk more about those circumstances if we want. But in short, my parents were very young and there were very complicated social circumstances, and I wasn't wanted from the beginning. It was a problem. And children at this age are very sensitive to their environment. So I was very able to pick up on the fact that I was not wanted. And these beliefs of being unworthy, not deserving of love or connection, not being wanted, they were entrenched deep inside of me. And so, how can you ever feel safe if you believe that you're not worthy of love or connection or belonging? Um, so these were very, very deep, like I said, entrenched beliefs inside of me. And of course, when I would navigate the world, the behaviors, the perceptions of the world that I had were very challenging and difficult. And of course, I created lots of behaviors because of that that were very dysfunctional or harmful. And so then I was very harsh and critical of myself, always evaluating and judging myself because, again, this was the early environment that I had. So, no matter where I was, could be sitting on the side of a mountain alone with my two lovely dogs at the time, and I would still feel like something was out to get me or somebody was right there going to hurt me because it wasn't what was happening outside of me, it was what was happening inside of me as a result of what happened to me. So that was the trauma that I carried, was it wasn't the things that happened to me in my developmental years. It was how I reacted, how I responded, how I adapted to those. And those were the patterns that I carried throughout the rest of my life, still deal with today.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the crux of really starting to feel safe in this world, which took a long time of really building awareness and having a practice of working with those dynamics inside of me.
Yeah, that really resonates. I work with so many people who, in their first few sessions, are just describing what you did. I wake up anxious, right? I wake up, my heart is racing, I'm nauseous, my stomach is in knots. And that, well, I mean, that's not in the big book of diagnostics, right? That doesn't fit the criteria for anxiety, but it sure fits a lot of criteria for just wrecking somebody's life. And then something else I've been encountering probably a lot in the past year since I started reading more into it is this idea of emotionally immature or unavailable parents in recent generations prior to, the most recent ones. And that really resonates as well in some ways, and I'd like to dive into a little bit of your experience growing up, but there seems to be a lot of people out there who have grown up in situations, right? We talk about trauma and big T trauma, that your life was threatened or there was some natural disaster or act of terrorism you were a part with. And people think, oh, yeah, that's okay. I've experienced trauma. But many people today have not gone through these kinds of things, but are feeling the effects of this long-term small T trauma, the compilation of all of these factors, and as you suggested, as you said, like kind of inhabit the body in some ways. Can you talk a little bit, what was it for you, what was it about your upbringing, again recognizing that there hasn't been a big T trauma in your life, but somehow throughout the process of growing up you've kind of found yourself there.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have the big T trauma, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the loss of parents, the abandonment of parents, which I check almost every one of those off. But then there's also the small t trauma, which I don't compare trauma or pain. It's unique for everybody.
Mhm.
And this small t trauma is just as impactful, just as hurtful, um, just as harmful. Small t trauma isn't necessarily about the bad things that happen to you that shouldn't happen. It can also be the good things that are supposed to happen that don't happen. Having present, loving, attuned parents who can communicate their love and their presence to their child in a way that the child is able to receive it. This is missing, as you're pointing out. Dan Siegel, the famous neuroscientist, he talks about interpersonal neurobiology, which essentially is when babies are developing, their nervous system, their emotional circuits are developing. They're literally downloading the information from the mature, regulated nervous emotional system, which is
Mhm.
the parents. But what happens when the parents are stressed? What happens when the parents are too busy figuring out finances and the stresses of navigating this turbulent time that we're living in? What happens when they don't have resources or any connection whatsoever with anybody and they're living in isolation? They have to go back to work a week, 2 weeks after giving birth, and this baby is now in childcare with scores of other little kids. What's the message that the child develops there? It's that I'm not important. My needs don't matter. I'm not safe. And even further, what happens if we do have parents that are present, physically present, but they're too occupied and too busy, stressed, and they're not there emotionally with their child? Or even further, what happens if they're carrying around a tremendous amount of pain themselves? What happens if they're carrying around all the wounds from their upbringing as well? Those are all passing directly onto the child as well. And so this is where we get into the realm of intergenerational trauma. The pain flows through the parents and goes directly to the child. And this is the environment that the body is developing in relationship to. So for instance, there's an emotional circuit, which is referred to in the neuroscience realm as the panic and grief emotional circuit. It's built into almost every living animal that has a direct rearing connection with parents. So we can find it in birds, we can find it in mammals, so on. And this panic grief emotional circuit is often referred to as the call the loved ones home. So if a baby bird falls out of a nest, this panic, grief, emotional circuit gets activated and the baby cries out, and that tells the mother to come and pick the baby back up and put him in the nest. This is inherent in humans as well. But what happens if the parents are well meaning, loving, caring, and they're indoctrinated or propagandized and they're listening to all the parenting experts who say, don't hold your baby when they cry out? This panic grief is at a very high level of activation, and they're crying out for the care, for the connection, for the love that they're completely dependent on. Humans are the most immature, undeveloped, dependent species that we can identify in this world for the longest amount of time. And so this baby's crying out, asking for the care and comfort, and the mother is suppressing all of her mother instincts to care and nurture this baby because her doctor said, don't hold this baby when they cry. So this panic grief is high level activated. Their body is developing in relationship to that. When you're feeling panic, what's happening? Your hormones are pumping cortisol, the stress hormone, adrenaline, histamines, raging through your body, and this becomes the baseline of our development. And so then later on in life, our hearts are beating out of our chest. We're always hot. Our muscles are tense and constricted. We're always in a state of panic. And we wonder why, and we call it anxiety. So we can see these very early areas where these patterns develop from the systemic areas of our life that our parents are inheriting as well.
And I mean, just to think back a generation or two ago, that was the dominant parenting practice, right? Dr. Spock's book, or however many books that pediatricians and obstetricians were told, like, yeah, just let them cry it out, 15 or 20 minutes, and 15 or 20 minutes for an infant is an eternity. I simply love how you have synthesized so much frightening but real research into that statement. And I remember the when I talk about these things, I will never forget. It must have been high school, maybe it was in college, maybe grad. I doubt grad school. It was early on. The famous monkey studies of the 50s or 60s, right? The hard monkey and the soft monkey, where we just started to realize that, right? Only 50 or 60 years ago, that when you take an infant monkey and you put it in a cage with a stuffed animal mother, its brain develops somewhat in a healthy way. Now, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. And you take an infant monkey and you put it in a cage with a wire, hard, cold, similarity to a mother, its brain doesn't develop and it eventually withers and dies. And that's just one factor that we found in the 50s or 60s. And now we're adding good neuroscience, good brain imaging into it. And we're realizing some of these practices, what they have done to us. So what's the answer? And I know you have an amazing answer to it. Your treatment and the work you do. How do we help people heal from this?
Yes. So yeah, modern science and research really came around to this in the 50s and 60s, as you're pointing out, maybe a little before then too. But this knowledge is nothing new. And this is inherent in every indigenous culture, every native culture knows the importance of healthy, secure attachments, connections early in life. In many indigenous cultures, they would have practices where if you were stressed, if you were having a difficult time, you weren't allowed to go near a pregnant mother because they understood the stress from this person would transmit through the mother into this baby developing in utero, and this baby would take on the stress of the environment. So this was very well known in most hunter-gatherer cultures that still exist to this day. They don't let the baby touch the ground until they're about 4 years old, meaning these babies are constantly held. They never, ever go without connection. Of course, in our very sterile, cold, disconnected city life here in, well, it's not just the West, it's all throughout the world. You can go into many of these indigenous areas and they'll have cities where they're just as disconnected as we are. And we can't be further away from that. So, what we really need to learn how to do is to reconnect with ourselves, right? We're not just disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from each other. We're disconnected from the world around us, and we're disconnected from what we do, meaning that what we do doesn't represent who we are. So, the healing journey becomes building awareness of what we carry, taking a responsibility and accountability agency for what's inside of us. We're not responsible for what happened to us. This is in no way to blame the mothers who are carrying their child, and this pain transmits and passes through the mother into the child, right? We're not responsible for the world that shaped us, but we are responsible for taking accountability for what's inside of us and for what we put into the world and what we transmit. And this is a practice that I help every single person that I work with build.
I am scribbling furiously things directions I want to go here. You made two such beautiful points, and one that I'm trying to help with just today. Probably part of why I'm somewhat exhausted. You said the mothers, the parents, it's not their fault. They're not to blame. Most parents, hopefully, did the best they could. Unfortunately, we are so removed from our indigenous inherent wisdom. I love that phrase you use, that inherent wisdom that we know to take care of infants, to nurture them, to pick them up when they're crying. But we've been instructed to go against that for so long. There seems to be, in my experience, especially lately in the past few years, maybe even more, this tendency for young people to become very angry with their parents for their mistakes, their errors, um, of the past, even if it was in good faith. And I guess that goes back to maybe your point of, well, I guess my big question is, how can we help that? But I think it goes back to what you said about connecting with this self. Can you maybe talk about that for specifically for our young people right now, our 20s and 30s that maybe are looking back at their parents with some frustration or disappointment or maybe even anger?
Yeah, and rightfully so,
Mhm.
right? What is the point of anger, right? What is the function? What purpose does anger serve? If we're feeling anger, we could get very curious about it. I'm not saying that we should let the anger come out, bursting out the seams in unconstructive, unhealthy ways. But we also don't want to suppress the anger as our culture and society absolutely tells us we need to do. So instead, let's get very curious about it. Let's try to figure out why is it here. So if we had troubled relationships with our parents growing up and we're feeling anger about that, what purpose might it serve? Well, the purpose of anger, well, for instance, if you're walking down a street in Chicago and somebody comes up and starts grabbing you and pushing you around, you're going to feel anger. You're going to put a boundary and say, "Don't touch me like that. Don't push me. Get away from me." Anger is there to set boundaries, to push the threats away, or to communicate that you have unmet needs. So when a baby is crying out in a fit of anger, they're expressing unmet needs, circumstances that they have needs for that are not being met. To be held, to be loved, to be accepted unconditionally, to not have to work for the relationship. So, this anger is a natural byproduct of the unmet needs of our development or of our environment. Again, I'm not saying that we should let this just come bursting out the seams in inappropriate ways, which is very frequently what happens. So instead, let's get very curious about it and we say, okay, so my parents weren't there for me. They abandoned me at a very early age. They abused me emotionally, physically, sexually, you name it. And that really hurt me, and I carry a tremendous amount of anger because of that. Well, we could ask a lot of questions here about this anger, and we could say, what kind of person does that to a child? And the inevitable answer that we'll come to is somebody who's also in a lot of pain. Where did they learn to treat somebody like that? Right? Chances are, if we look at it objectively, we would see that all the things that our parents did to us, somebody did to them as well. They're carrying around the exact same pain that we feel. In other words, there's probably nobody in the world who understands our pain as much as they do. And there's probably nobody who understands their pain as much as we do. So to be angry, to ridicule, to criticize, to judge, evaluate, to punish, to exile our parents for what they did to us is to continue the exact same pattern of what was done to us. Instead, what we can do is we can take responsibility for what has happened, for this intergenerational pattern that was handed down through the generations. It's not our parents' fault. They did the best that they could with what they had. Yes, they could have put in more effort. Yes, they could have tried and gone through more, put more energy into connecting and understanding these things. But they did the best they could. We could take that for granted. And to judge them, to be angry at them, is also to do the same thing to ourselves. because that exact same pain, those exact same patterns are inside of us. So instead of fighting these things, instead of trying to get rid of them, instead of trying to change them and fix them, let's try to get very curious about it. Let's try to understand why they're here, where they come from, and how these patterns and emotions show up in the moment, in the present. In other words, how the pain from the past shows up here and now. And what we can do with that is we can try and figure out what are the unmet needs underlying these emotions, these perceptions, these behaviors. And then we could try to meet those needs in healthy, constructive ways.
Beautifully stated. That is rich. Um, wow. I will certainly forward that snippet of the podcast to a few people in particular. Thank you. Uh, I want to come, we will come back to that, but there was another thing you said that I want to make sure we come back to. And this can be, I heard it in two ways, either related to an overarching principle of who we are or in our careers and our choices for work. You said uh, what we do is not consistent with who we are.
That's right.
What do you mean by that?
Yes. So let's say you grow up in a household where there's high expectations, evaluations, judgments. Or let's say you grow up in a household where your parents are not available. They're too busy, too stressed. They're maybe even physically present, but they're not emotionally present with you. We would call this proximal separation would be the term where they're physically there, but they're checked out. And we see this very, very commonly today with parents and their phones, walking
Mm,
around, pushing their babies or walking around with their kids, but they're just stuck on their screens.
yeah.
What's the message you get there as a child where you're trying to connect with your parents and they're unavailable? It's the phone's more important than I am. The job's more important than I am. The whatever it is that they're doing is more important than I am. I don't matter. I'm not important. I'm not valued. I'm not respected. Now, growing up, the attachment is the most important thing for a child. We can't survive without it. And the next thing that is equally as important is the need for authenticity to express your boundaries, to express your emotions, to be who you are uniquely yourself. But what happens when those two are in conflict with each other? Meaning that if you express your anger because your parents are disconnected, you get punished, or you get put in a timeout, meaning you get disconnected. In other words, they threaten you with the thing that's most important to you, the connection. Well, the authenticity, who you are, gets sacrificed to maintain the attachment. In those situations, there's really only two ways that a child can look at this situation unconsciously, of course. A child doesn't have the mental capacity to weigh out all of these options. So it's an unconscious decision, but they have to make a choice. The first option that they can come to is my parents are unavailable, or my parents are hurting me, or my parents are doing whatever it is that's causing me this harm because they're not up to the job. They're not qualified to be parents. They're not emotionally mature or regulated. They don't have the skills and tools that they need. In other words, I'm not safe. And now, some children do come to that. I was one of them. I came to it very early in my life.
Mhm.
But the first choice that always comes up is, well, my parents actually do know what's going on. They're older. They've survived this world. They have connections. And even further, if you're watching your parents care for other children or other people more than they're caring for you, it's very clear they do know how to care for people. It is there. The problem is I'm not worthy of it. I'm not deserving of it. I'm not good enough to get their care. But if I could be good enough, then I will get the care. Then I'll get the connection. Then I'll get the value, the respect, all the things that I really need. So we start to adapt to this pain by trying to be good enough. We become people pleasers. We fill up our calendars to work with as many people as we can because we get a sense of contributing and helping people. We're valued, we're important, we're respected. We go out into the world and we acquire massive amounts of status, of prestige, of respect, of financial resources. We sacrifice ourselves to help people as often as we can to do things for them, even when we don't want to do them. So, a lot of the patterns of who we become later in life are built on adaptations to these pains, right? One of my teachers would always say, and this was certainly the case for me. He told me this, and when he told me, I said, "Well, I don't want to hear that. That is not my situation." But it absolutely was. Is when we feel like we're not good enough, right? When we feel like we're not deserving or we're not valued, well, then we go to medical school because then we're going to be important, and then we're going to be valued, and then people are going to need us for crying out loud from the beginning of the day until the end of the day, and everything in between. We're going to be important and valued. So that's an expression of me doing things that is not in line with who I am as a person. And this is how we all get so disconnected, not just from ourselves, because we're not paying attention to that pain that we're in. We're not connected to it. The adaptation of being busy, of being valuable, of being respected by all these people out there is a disconnection, a distraction from the pain that we're in. And then we're not connected to each other because I'm more focused on being important and valued. I'm not actually here with you right now, Dan. I'm not seeing what you're going through. I'm not seeing what you're feeling. I'm not attuned and connected to you, right? I'm not connected to the world around me by any means because I'm so focused on being important and being valued. And everything that I do is to those ends. So this is what an addiction looks like. And again, we'll find those patterns in ourselves, and we'll find very similar patterns to what created our pain to begin with. So, another reason why we want to be very careful not to blame anybody, because blaming somebody who hurt us, we're also blaming ourselves. And there is no outcome that is constructive and conducive to what we're looking for when blame is a part of this equation.
And I would agree with your instructor, even in another way, that for those that don't go on to medical school to be needed in that way, many of them become therapists to fill their calendar every day. So beware the therapist. It's been a while since I've told this story, but somebody I worked with long ago, another therapist this was back in the days of paper calendar books, and I accidentally saw that calendar book one day, and every day, Monday through Friday, every hour from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. was filled. And if there was ever a cancellation, or if it was known in advance that a client wasn't going to show up, that person had their secretary staff fill that right away, Monday through Friday. And then Saturday was a lesser day of only 7 a.m. maybe to 2 p.m. And I just remember seeing that as a young therapist and thinking, there is something not right there. Yes, there are people that need help, but we need to make sure we take care of ourselves well and do the work that you're describing. So beware the therapist who has the full paper schedule book. Um, I, I'm so enjoying our conversation, but I continue to be beautifully distracted by your background. And I want to talk about that, but I know that naturally leads into the work you do there. And in particular, I know what you've just shared definitely relates to somatic work. I'm always excited to hear about the different kinds of somatic work people do, but then also the overall work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
hmm Yeah, so I'm here in my therapy room right now. This is where I see people at for the time being. And in terms of the somatic work, so when I talk about this, I talk about getting in tune with the body, reconnecting with the body. So if somebody comes to me and they say, I have anxiety, I have depression, so on and so forth, um, when I start to look at what does that mean for them, there's obviously patterns that are associated with it, like depression would be the literal burying or stuffing down or disconnecting of emotions in particular. The word depression means to bury and to take away energy. And those are the two major characteristics of what we would call psychological or emotional depression. And so, what I start to look at very early on is what level of disconnection to the body are they feeling and why? And so, if somebody says I have anxiety or I have depression, we do an exercise where we try to take an inventory of what feelings, what physical sensations live in the body. And I pay very close attention to what the relationship with those feelings is. Do they like it? Do they dislike it? Do they welcome it? Do they fight it? Do they try to get rid of it? Do they judge it, evaluate it, criticize it? Do they try to exile it? Right? What is the relationship with these feelings in the body? And the goal is to build awareness so we can recognize or identify these feelings in the body and what emotion in particular is associated with. And then I ask things like, when was the first time you can remember feeling it? In other words, how long has it been here? How often do you feel this? Is it every day? Is it multiple times a day? Is it all throughout the day? Once we can start to see how present this feeling is and what we do with it, I distract from it. I go get wasted. I get drunk. I go to work. I scroll on my phone. I go gamble, so on and so forth. All these adaptations to get away from it. We can see that those adaptations, they're not the primary problem, issue that we're dealing with. They're actually an attempt to solve the problem. And the problem is that I have this pain in my body and I don't know what to do with it. And we can almost always trace this back to very early in life, where my needs were not being met. And this feeling in my body, just like that panic grief that I was describing earlier, was telling me these needs are not being met. And so at a very early age, I learned I had to disconnect from them because they were telling me something in my environment was very dangerous or harmful to me. And I couldn't listen to that. I had to disconnect from it so that way I could maintain my relationships. And so the somatic practice is we try to get back in tune with that feeling and we try to build a relationship with it. And the way that we can do that is you do what I'm doing right now is you sit on the floor or anywhere. You can sit on a dirty IKEA rug, which I've spent years doing and hours every single day sitting on, or you can sit in a chair and you just close your eyes and you turn your attention inward and you try to find that feeling. And what we're going to try to do is build a relationship with it. So we'll try to connect with it, try and spend some time with it. When I ask people when they first started feeling this feeling, right, where does this go back to? What were the things that you really needed when you were feeling this feeling? It's almost always something along the lines of the exact same thing, which is I needed somebody to be with me. I needed somebody to see me, to understand and hear me, to know what I was going through, to accept what I was going through, not try to fight it, not try to fix it. Don't try to tell me it's a different way, right? I want you to see it, understand it, accept it, and then try to give me some comfort. Try to validate and reaffirm me, and maybe even a physical comfort. And of course, to do this consistently. And ideally, show me some way to process this pain, to navigate it. These are along the lines, not everything, but a lot of the things that people really needed. And then if we look at, well, what's your relationship with this feeling? Well, I avoid it. Distract from it. I try to get rid of it. I hate this feeling. We can see we're continuing that exact same pattern that caused the pain to begin with. So let's try to create a pattern of doing something new. Let's try to be that person who we needed to care for us, and we'll try and care for ourselves in that exact way. That's the practice.
Love that kind of work. Now, tell me, being that you're in Portland and the name of your practice is psychedelic integration, correct? Can you talk a little bit of how does psychedelic assisted therapy work with the work you're doing right now?
Yeah. So a psychedelic experience is, by definition, one where you connect very deeply with yourself. That's what the word psychedelic means, is psyche, the immaterial aspects of who you are, your mind, your emotions, your spirituality, so on and so forth, and delic, emerging or manifesting. So a connection with these aspects of yourself. And so my entire practice is based on facilitating this type of experience. And so very early, very, very early, right when I first start working with somebody, of course, I'll give them the overview and all of the logistics of how this is going to work, and we'll have lots of consent about the conversations we're going to have. And then I go straight for the core of things. I don't spend a lot of time building the familiarity and all that stuff. I don't do that. I wouldn't do anybody any favors by taking that time. Within 5 minutes, I'm going to get directly to what's bringing this person in. And then I'm going to help them connect with it. So we facilitate this psychedelic experience right away.
Mhm.
And of course, working with a psychedelic substance like psilocybin, for instance, can be very, very powerful in this therapeutic context. The psychedelic is very good at lots of things. In particular, it's really good at bringing things to your awareness, especially any pains, constrictions, adaptations, patterns that you have that maybe helped you, maybe even saved your life at one point, but now cause you harm. Those are the things that are going to come up to the surface. So, if we want to work with a psychedelic substance, we need to make sure that we're very well prepared to see those types of things that are going to come up. Because if we don't, and if we have a pattern of avoiding, exiling, fighting, struggling with these feelings or emotions or memories, what happens when a psychedelic brings it up? Well, we try to avoid it, we try to get rid of it. And that's the recipe for a very, very difficult time.
Mhm.
So we try to connect with it very, very early on. And then once we have a foundation of we've done enough inquiry, we've taken the inventory, we know what we're dealing with, we know what's inside of us, at least to a certain level. We've reached a capacity, a saturation of what we really want to work with. And we've spent weeks cultivating a practice of intentionally going into that space and connecting with that feeling every day, multiple times a day, as often as we can. Then we use a psychedelic experience as a tool to connect with that feeling, to connect with that wound, that pain that's inside of us, to try to go in and nurture and comfort it in ways that we were unable to do up until this point. One other thing, well, two things that the psychedelic is really good at as well is writing new patterns. So if we have this pattern of avoidance, of exiling, of conflict inside of us, we can do something new very quickly with a psychedelic. And the other thing that it's very good at is showing you things that you might not have known before. So for me, I had all this pain inside of me. I wanted to comfort it. I wanted to connect with it. I wanted to process it and express it, but I had no idea of what that looks like. Sure, I hear people talk about it. Sure, I read all the books, but the experience of doing it was completely outside of what I knew how to do. And it was with the psychedelic experience where I got the feeling of being held by a mother, being welcomed, being loved, accepted, nurtured. And this was the first time in my life that I had really gotten that. Now, of course, when you talk to somebody who's addicted to a substance like alcohol or heroin, they'll tell you that's exactly what they get from it. So,
Yeah.
getting it from a psychedelic shows me exactly how I can cultivate this feeling myself and how I can give it to myself without needing to go to those external sources to get it. So if we use this as a tool, a very specific tool, and we come up with intentions of what we want to go in and work on, of course, and we stay open to whatever else may come up, we can really get to some incredible depths very, very quickly, especially when that conditioned mind, the lens of perception that we see the world and ourselves through, the defenses, the defense mechanisms that are in place to keep us away from that pain, when those are very strong, a psychedelic experience can be very useful at letting those soften and dissipate, even just for a little bit of time, just so we can experience something completely new outside of that old familiar pattern. And that's kind of the way that we go about it.
That story just took me back so viscerally, so somatically to my most recent psilocybin experience through training in a group setting. I'll just never forget feeling just being open, like my arms out open, and feeling the intense love that I hadn't felt. I'm sure there are points in life where I had felt that, but in that moment to have that experience and to be reminded that that kind of love exists in the world was so powerful. And um, my wife and family are very thankful for it because I came back a much more loving person. So it's just a small example of what that kind of work can do. Um, as I was listening to the work that you do, what I have found in my work recently, but then also I've been told and experienced with people who have used psychedelic assisted therapy for a little bit longer, is very often we are helping people much more quickly. No longer, for some, no longer do we need months or years of treatment, but sometimes within, well, a much quicker amount of time in sessions, people are receiving this beautiful healing. Is that similar to your experience? What are you finding in length of treatment for people?
Yeah. Well, I want to be very careful here because
Mhm.
a lot of the information that is coming out about psychedelic therapy kind of paints it as a magic pill. This idea that you take this and everything is fixed, everything is completely different, everything changes. Now, don't get me wrong, that absolutely can happen, and I've seen it. That's not been my experience. And when I work with people, yes, I see very big, immediate transformation in people just from conversation. They'll very frequently tell me 5, 10, 15 minutes into our very first call that they've never thought about things this way. They've never asked these questions, and no therapist, no doctor has ever asked these questions before. And once we start to build that practice, which we'll do in our very first session, is we start to see change and transformation right away. Now, what I wanted to be careful about is that this is not an end destination. There is no end destination. It's more of a commitment to exactly as you just said, living life more openly, embodying more acceptance, more compassion, more connection. And if we didn't have those, like you mentioned too, it's very difficult to cultivate those things and to create those in our lives. And then a byproduct of that is it passes on to the next generation as well. And then this pattern of intergenerational trauma continues. But as you saw right there is very quickly, it can really help us open up. It can show us a new way of living, a new way of experiencing life and connection that we were closed off to minutes before that. And so it's not a destination, but it's a commitment to continuing that and to nurturing and developing and maturing the practice of staying open, staying in tune with what I'm going through, nurturing, caring for myself. So that way, I'm at a place where I can connect with the people who are important to me. So if I can be present with myself rather than avoiding myself and disconnecting from myself, now I can be present with my children. or with my partner or with my dog or with my friends or especially with my clients, right?
Mhm.
If I want to be present with anybody else, first I have to be present with myself. So this is the practice that we start to work on. And there's depths, there's levels to this stuff. Um, and I usually work with people for 6 to 8 weeks at a time.
Mhm.
And very frequently, they'll come back
Yeah.
and they'll tell me right away, this was life changing. I got more in these 6 weeks than I did in 20, 30, 40 years of therapy, so on and so forth. I've had lots of people who were on the verge of getting medical assisted suicide. They usually won't tell me that until the like halfway point or 2/3 through with what we're working through. But I can see those things,
Yeah.
and the changes that happen in such a short amount of time, it's real. And it's not the substance that's going to do that for you. If you come into a psychedelic experience without preparing, without laying down that foundation, without taking that inventory of what you need to work through or what you are working through, and you just take a psychedelic substance, chances are things are going to get exacerbated and it's going to get very turbulent. And that's happened to me too when I first got started. But on the other hand, if we're able to really go into that space intentionally and to work through something like this, yeah, we can see very profound shifts very quickly. And the most important thing is that we develop, we mature, we cultivate, we stay committed to the practice of how we're going to live and enjoy our life.
Beautiful. I think you speak to what we often talk about as good preparation for the journey, for the psychedelic part of the treatment, but also life-changing integration afterwards. That it's not just about taking a substance and expecting profound change, but everything that else that goes on around it. And much like I know on your website, you reference Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, as do I often. I think that's very true in life that we can make these profound changes in a short amount of time, but just in any, as in any hero story, it takes good mentorship to sustain that throughout life. Because life's always changing, whether it's connecting with kids, your dog, or family, or clients, or work. There will be hiccups along the road. So to have a therapist that you trust to make these profound changes, but to come back to is truly a blessing, as is Julian. This conversation has been powerful. Thank you. You've reminded me of a lot of the work that we do. I do have to ask again, I am absolutely, for those watching on YouTube, the art behind you is beautiful. Can you quickly, before we wrap, can you tell me a little bit about that or who that's
Mhm.
by or where that's from?
Yeah. Um, well, some of these are done by um, indigenous Shipibo from the Amazon.
Mhm.
Like, I think that these ones over here are out of the camera's view. And then I have, of course, some famous ayahuasca visionary artists like Pablo Aramingo. And the ones that you're able to, well, like that one in the corner, that tetrahedron is actually carved from ayahuasca vine, again by a local, just indigenous person. They didn't sign a name on it. They didn't make anything. It was done in the Amazon. Um, these paintings behind me are by a local artist in Peru as well named Lobsang. And yeah, each one of those is a visionary painting from psychedelic experiences. He has a bunch of them actually, and I really resonated with these ones, so that's why I brought them back.
They're certainly beautiful. Once again, what a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find out more about your work and connect with you?
Mhm. The website, that's the best method there, which you've already been on, so we could link that. I try to post articles on there, very short, just little snippets about what we're talking about,
Mhm.
lots of resources, and I'm starting to. I'm not very good at it. I don't do social media. I don't go online. That's one of the distractions for me right there is I can get sucked into that. So I make a very conscious effort to stay off of that. But I do go on to Instagram and post things occasionally. Don't expect me to communicate much on there, but there are, short videos and little things like that that other people can find as well, which I'll happily send you the link for that as well.
Beautiful. Please do. Again, such a robust conversation, so much goodness throughout our time together. If there, I don't want to limit it, but if we were to limit it to one or two things that you really want listeners to take away, what might those be?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I think a lot of people are going through something similar to what I've gone through as well, which is the pain seems so great, so big, so overwhelming, kind of like the wall in Pink Floyd's The Wall. No matter how hard he tried, he could not break free. The wall was too big, as you could see. Um, you know, it just seems like there's no way of getting through that or getting around that. Uh, and when I was working with people, when I was studying this, I was seeing people make transformations and make changes. And I thought to myself, well, it's available. It's just available to some people, but that's probably just not going to be my life. Again, that was another shape of the view of I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving. So what I would want to say is that I come from the foundational belief that the wisdom, the wholeness, the healing, the ability to care for others and for yourself, all of this is inherent and inside each and every one of us. And it's a light that cannot be dimmed, it cannot be contained, and it cannot be extinguished. It's always there. We can lose it, we can become disconnected from it, and we can find it again. When somebody's healing from an addiction, we say they're in recovery. The word recover means to find something that we've lost. What is it that people are finding when they're in recovery? It's themselves. It's who they were or who they would have been before all of this pain. There's only one outcome that we can find of wholeness, and it's inside of us. It's inside each and every one of us, and we can find it. And again, we want to be very careful about blaming and being harsh and critical and judgmental to ourselves and to others, because this is an impediment on that path of reconnecting with who we were. So it's inside of each and every one of us. We can find it. We can build a practice. And even though we're going through very dark times, and it's likely that it's going to get darker before things start to get better, there are resources, there are people out there who can help with this, and the wisdom, everything is inside of you.
That is beautiful. Much like my teacher, Dr. Viktor Frankl, says, the human spirit is always there. It does not become ill, but sometimes we ignore it, we avoid it, we don't pay attention. And when we do, that the healing power of that human spirit is always within us. Julian, thank you so much for your time. I often tell people I don't go back and listen to my own episodes. It's one way to keep me humble. But I tell you what, this one I will go back and listen to for your wisdom and insight that you have there. Thank you so very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words, Dan. Thank you for having me as well. Feel free to stay in touch. And yeah, if you ever want to have another conversation, please feel free to reach out anytime.
Count on it. Take care.